hit a plateau that has you asking, is this it? Have you accomplished all you've set out to do in life and are not feeling as fulfilled as you thought you would? It is normal at midlife to reassess what's working for you and what's not. It's also normal to want to reclaim your time, your energy, and your joy. Let's make the best out of the second half of our lives by having more fun, experiencing more peace, and feeling more joy. If any of this resonates with you, then this podcast is for you. I'm Megan Bayless Bartley. Now let's get ready to shift our shit.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Shifting Our Shit, the SOS podcast. I'm Megan Bayless Bartley, here back with season 3. We are going to be talking about boundaries, and joining us this season is Elizabeth McCormick. Elizabeth, hello, welcome.
Hi, Megan. How are you?
I'm good. You know, you came and dropped in season 2. We got to meet you and find out a little bit about you, and I will say that your episodes performed very well. People really listened to your episodes, and I went back and I was like, dang, what was it about that? And it was because we talked about boundaries. You're a boundaries expert.
It's great. It's what I do all day.
I know, right? I love talking about boundaries, and I think people are going to enjoy this season because I think, I think sometimes we're not real sure what boundaries are or what exactly we do with them and why they're important. So this season is just going to be about addressing all that, especially as we go into the holiday season and might have to spend time and energy around people or in situations that might test our boundaries, right?
For sure.
So before we jump into this, we're going to ask if today, Elizabeth, was your favorite family board game or family game that you play together, what would today be?
So it's not my favorite, but because my favorite, because now you said favorite, and then that creates all this other connotation. So favorite, because I'm pretty competitive. So my favorite is Ticket to Ride, but I wouldn't say that Ticket to Ride is what represents today. What represents today for me is a game called Sequence. And the reason why we play Sequence in therapy is because you have to play offense and defense. So not only when you're playing, you have to pay attention to you trying to get your sequence of tokens in a row, but you also have to pay attention and prevent the other person from getting their sequence. And so when I'm looking at today and kind of what's happening this week, I have a lot that is happening. Tomorrow is Halloween, so we'll just place that's where we are in the moment right now. And so I'm having a party, little gathering at my house for Halloween so that my kids will have something to do that's fun and have friends to hang out with. The next day, we're going to go get our family pictures taken. And so if you know anything about teenage boys, that is their least favorite day of their lives. And they're a good sport, and my photographer is a great lady, and she gets it done in 15 minutes. It's like,
wow,
smile and you're out. And so I tell them, you get 15 minutes of her time, and you're going to be awesome little rock stars. And then we'll go out to eat, and you can pick the restaurant. So I kind of have to bribe them. But there's just something kind of happening every night, and we're celebrating. My senior is having senior night for marching band, and he was in the Tampa Bay newspaper this weekend, and lots of really fun, exciting things are going on. But it's just busy.
And your husband has a birthday next week.
You know, he reminded me that this morning. He's like, so just so we know, Monday is my birthday, and I was like, oh, hey, that's right.
Right, I knew that.
Right next to all the other things. What do you want to do for your birthday? So, thanks, Megan, for reminding me.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah,
yep.
I have spent a few birthdays with you all.
McCormick, you have.
Well, I was thinking for me, the game, not my favorite, also, but the game that represents today is kind of like Jenga. You know, where I'm sort of balancing all these things. We're doing plumbing remodel in our house, upgrading, and some bathroom issues. And so that's never fun. So we're all sort of just all over each other in the house, and then just work stuff and all the things where it's like, balancing all the things. And I was thinking about Jenga as far as boundaries go too, because boundaries is a way to practice self-care, and Jenga is one of these things where you're being very delicate about how you remove blocks so that all the other blocks don't tumble over. And I'm sure most of the people who listen to this podcast can identify with that, because many of us are in that fuck it 40s sort of stage where we're, like, how much do I really want to be delicate with this? And do I want to just yank that block and be done with it? And wherever the chips fall, they fall,
Mhm.
But let's get right into boundaries and defining boundaries. And I don't do a lot of prep work for these because I like it just to be pretty free flowing. But I did today look up on the Oxford Dictionary what the definition of boundaries are, and it says, of course, now the print is super teeny tiny. Well, shoot. I'm going to have to look it up on my other computer.
I was like, here's where 40 comes up and you can't read the print of your dictionary.
And I can't read it. And I even am wearing my,
Readers.
spectacles. So my readers. Yeah, that's pretty sad, isn't it? A limit of a subject or sphere of activity. A line that marks the limits of an area. So it is this idea of setting limits, right? And I was thinking about this, about how do we know what our limits are, right? I mean, how do we know what our limits really are? So now that we're in this, for those of us who are in this stage of the fuck it 40s, are we, deciding and finding out what we're having more limits, right? I wonder if there's a certain definition that you have of really what boundaries are.
So when I talk to folks about it, I'd like to think about, we can use the model of like, here's my yard, right? And so this is the boundary line of what's in my yard. And this is my neighbor's yard. And I keep my dog in my yard. And that's a very clear definition. When we talk about our emotional boundaries, rather than just like physical boundaries, yes, this is my person, but we regularly will say like, little kids don't understand the social, like close talkers are not understanding the social boundaries. And so the emotional piece is really important when we kind of think about our relationships and where do I stop and the next person begins. And so if I like to think of it, and I tell lots of folks, I don't know if you know about like those blow up balls that you can get inside. And then you run around on a field and kick a ball and you knock into all these other people in a bubble suit kind of thing. And so I like when I'm just initially starting with somebody and we're talking about their boundaries, we first start with, do you have good feeling identification? Are you self-aware that you know how you feel? And that for some people are like, I have no idea how I feel. I'm just bouncing around in the universe all day long. And I just feel by whatever washes over me or whatever kind of comes into my world. And so that's just about being aware of the energy that you possess and the energy of others. So just kind of knowing that that is contagious, knowing that how other people, whether it's their facial expression, their body language, like it doesn't take a whole lot for us to be picking up on someone else's energy. And so I think boundaries get a lot of bad rap. A lot of times we're just like, this is just about, you can't cross my line and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, no, actually, I want us to think about our boundary as our self-protection. And instead, I want us to think of it as like, okay, this is what's okay for me, and I'm going to get really good at what's okay for me. And then being willing, the next, hurdle is being willing to say what's not okay for me. But I think so
Yes.
many times we haven't done the work and the self-awareness to
Yes.
even see what's okay for me. How do I set my
Exactly.
own standards of I'm not going to be just this blow up ball that's just bouncing around on the field and running into everybody and having no clue as to how I
Right.
feel or what space I take up, because so
Right.
many of us are taught so many unhealthy things, which we'll probably get to. But if
Right.
we just look at it from this, like, what does the boundary look like? What does it feel like? We have to get really good at our self awareness.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times we're taught to pay attention to how other people are feeling, or how does that, are you hurting somebody else's feeling? Like, it's that idea of like everything I learned in kindergarten type stuff is like playing well with others. And
Mhm.
are you sharing, are you doing all these things? And I think we have to evolve some of that as we get older and realize that as adults, it's our job to take care of ourselves, and it's other adults' jobs to take care of themselves, right? And that it's not our job to constantly take care of other people's feelings or thoughts or whatever it might be. We know what our intentions are. Other people might assume it's a different intention. And I was reminded recently, I always say that nonverbal communication is 90+% of what we actually communicate. And I was reminded by my mentor, he was like, no, it is 93% specific, but I've seen it as high as like 97%. And then, so I always say over
We're making it
90%
up.
of, yes, what we communicate is our nonverbal communication. So it's the tone of voice. So, like your implied meaning messages or whatever of saying something, which you can say, like, I love you, or you can say, I love you, right? And it's same words, but it comes off
Different
with
meaning.
different because of tone of voice, volume of voice, facial expression, body posture, hand movements, all communicate 90% of what we're trying to communicate. So, and I think, when we are, conversing and communicating with somebody, one, yes, we need to know ourselves. And most people, I think, have lost touch with themselves, right? So part of this is, how do we just get back in touch with ourselves, become more mindful? And the book that I wrote, Reset, which I happen to have a copy here because I did a presentation for a hypnosis group. And the idea is, checking in with yourself of what am I needing in this moment? And what does that even mean? Do I need, you know, food, water, sleep, basic stuff? Or do I need some time away from this loud stuff? Or do I need, something different than I need right this minute, which might be different in an hour from now, or might be different this evening, right? What's, what we need in each moment.
Yeah, for sure. And I think people kind of have a hard time. They can get the tangible of I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm hangry, where I'm angry and tired, and I just have some real basic needs. But then when we have to move to that second tier of like, I'm lonely, I need to feel loved, I need to feel connected to another person, it then becomes much more complicated on how we
Yes.
get those needs met and being able to identify like, I feel out of sorts, but I don't really know. Is it because I need to go for a walk and I need to move my body? Or do I need to lay on the floor in Shavasana to like let it all release and take some really nice deep breaths to get my brain back working and in a productive way? But I think we spend so much time just taking in all of this sensory input that it's hard to make the okay, I've taken all this information in. Now, what do I do? Now, how do I
Exactly.
react, respond, do something helpful for myself? Whether that
Yes.
means being alone or making connection with somebody else, making a phone call to a friend, all of those things can be helpful in that reset process.
Right. And I'm thinking about the four basic feelings back to like glad, mad, sad, or scared, right? Because I think about how oftentimes with emotional boundaries, there is an element of, what is it I'm needing in this moment? But if I'm worried about a conversation I have to have, or, if I have some social, anxiety and being in a social situation or whatever, it's almost like, assessing how am I gonna show up in these situations, or are there certain, I'm a planner, so I'm always thinking about like, okay, if I'm going into the situation and I know I'm going to be around certain people or new people, that could make me feel a little scared because I don't know how that's going to go. Or, and I think, like you said, part of that is when we are regulating ourselves based on how other people are showing up, that kind of puts a wrench in the whole system versus regulating ourselves and showing up a certain way. And then whatever comes at us, we have to kind of shift and, move to, allow that its space to do whatever it needs to do. So we don't necessarily have to take it on.
Yeah, and I totally want us to be able to know the difference between I'm going to accommodate, I'm going to like pay attention to what's happening around me. I'm going to figure out what I need first, but then I'm going to pay attention versus I'm going to just go into the world and react to everything that happens near me. Whether somebody's yelling and so I'm going to yell back, or there's something kind of happening, if we're able to just do a better job at paying attention to us, having really good feeling identification, and being able to say like, okay, today my goal is just to pay attention to how I feel in different spaces. That's all I have to do. I don't have to do anything related to anybody else. It's just pay attention to how I feel. Until we get really good at that, we're not good at that secondary step with accommodating and responding and all the other things. And so until we're good and we're confident about our self-awareness and we're able to kind of sit in our own spot, sometimes I'll tell people if they're going into something that feels like a difficult conversation, like we could talk about conflict for weeks too. I mean, besides boundaries, we could throw in all these other topics of, okay, well, how do I show up to that conversation? And a lot of times I'll say, your job, and I learned this in therapy and learning how to be a therapist, is just show up and be a non-anxious presence. Just show up and just sit in the uncomfortable space. You don't have to say anything. A lot of people come to me and they're like, oh, this good friend of mine is grieving and I don't know what to say. I don't know. And I'm like, you need to say nothing. You need to show up as a non-anxious presence. Just try to show up and sit with them. Don't worry. There's nothing you can say that's going to make this better. So just be willing to sit with them. Hold your own feelings, hold your own anxiety, and just allow them their bubble and their space to feel and to say whatever they need to say and feel.
Absolutely. I love that idea. The thing I was thinking too of that the observing is just slow it all down, right? Because we're usually operating so quickly. And so if we show up in a space and we're just observing it, we're noticing it. That's like simply what mindfulness is, right? It's just noticing how am I feeling as this thing is happening? Or, oh, that thing is happening, and not assigning any judgment to it, that it's good or bad or right or wrong. It's like, oh, there's a kiddo who's having a meltdown. Okay. And not jumping to any conclusions about that, but just identifying that's what's happening. Or, there's a dog loose in the neighborhood and what's going to happen? I don't know, but it just is, and not having to maybe do a bunch of stuff for it.
Mm-hmm. To allow those things to exist and for you to pay attention to you and just be okay with, I can handle this situation. I don't have to get anxious, and I don't have to control anybody else. I don't have to control that dog. I don't have to control the kid who's having a meltdown, like how different
Yes.
kids feel connection and able to calm down when it's not someone telling them to calm down. Like no one in the history of the
Yes.
planet has ever calmed down because someone told them to calm down. Like that actually doesn't work. There's nothing
Yes.
about that works. And so
Yes.
instead, if we can kind of saddle up next to somebody and just be non-anxious and take some deep breaths and just allow them to have those feelings. We make jokes about it all the time, but that helps, that co-regulation helps a kiddo calm down so much better than just get your act together, stop behaving this way, and all the different ways
Right.
we try to control that behavior.
Yes. Or couples in a relationship of, I've definitely, when one of the person says, can you just calm down? I can't talk to you when you're like this, right? Of like, there is something about that emotional part of the brain and the logical rational side of the brain. And so what we're trying to do when we're paying attention to noticing and how we're feeling is sort of, meld these two together, is noticing, slowing down the process of reacting to something versus trying to figure out how you might want to respond if you have a little bit more information, right? But the co-regulation thing and like mirror neurons are a real legit thing where there is something that happens within us when we see someone we love feeling hurt or feeling a certain feeling, and we can tell a lot of times by their nonverbal communication. And so maybe that's even just, checking in with them too. I know we're talking about checking in with ourselves, but saying, I'm noticing your face just changed. What just happened? Like, are you upset with me? Because I'm feeling like you're probably now upset with me, and how do we just notice that and not, maybe we don't have to jump to conclusions, but get clarification too.
And sometimes that can be enough to slow the situation down to be like, oh no, I'm not actually upset. I was just thinking about something else. But so frequently we react rather than just be curious about the situation.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
takes a turn.
Yes. And we're kind of running into our part 2 of this topic. We're going to be extending this. I have an interesting thought about curiosity. So we'll come back to this episode in part 2, and we'll talk more about why it's important to have boundaries, but also be curious. The curiosity thing is a real important key. So we'll meet you back here in part 2.